We're starting with what happened in New York. It was a busy morning. New York City is on edge after an attempted terror attack. An explosion took place near the Port Authority bus terminal near Times Square around 7:30 a.m. local time, just when people were starting their day and heading to work. According to officials, one person tried to detonate a pipe bomb strapped to his body, but it either malfunctioned or did not go off the way it was supposed to. The suspect has been taken into custody and identified as 27-year-old Aqaidullah. Officials believe he acted alone. Aqaidullah is among the 4 people suffering non-life-threatening injuries after this explosion. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio visited the spot and called this incident an attempted terror attack. Listen in.
This is New York. The reality is that we are a target by many who would like to make a statement against democracy, against freedom. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor, and that makes us an international target. We understand that. With the internet now, anyone can go on the internet and download garbage and vileness on how to put together an amateur-level explosive device. And that is the reality that we live with.
The explosion caused chaos in one of the busiest commuter hubs. The bus terminal, as well as the train lines below the Port Authority building, were shut down for 3 to 4 hours. Aerial footage from the scene showed emergency vehicles and hundreds of police and fire personnel in the street outside the terminal. Joining us for the very latest, WION's correspondent William Denslow with us from New York. And we also have Ray Locker, National Security Advisor for USA Today, with us from Washington. Good evening to both of you. William, let's begin with you. What's the latest that we have?
Well, you mentioned the suspect, Aqaidullah. According to law enforcement, we understand that the suspect is a 27-year-old. He resides in the Brooklyn neighborhood here in New York, and that he's been in the United States for some 7 years. As you mentioned, one of those 4 that are suffering from minor injuries currently being treated in hospital. Now, you played that clip, and really that shows the clear message from law enforcement in New York that the takeaway from this press conference in many ways is the fact that, as they stated, that this in many ways is now a reality for New Yorkers, and said that this was very much an attack on the values that New Yorkers hold so dear. They said that this is a device that could be made on the internet by anyone. So this is a real concern for law enforcement, but they say that New Yorkers are a savvy bunch, and they call on all New Yorkers to do more and to stay vigilant and to protect themselves, and in many ways help law enforcement do their jobs by just staying vigilant. Of course, the catchphrase here in New York is, if you see something, to say something. That's the clear message that they're trying to convey to New Yorkers as they now return to their daily lives.
Ray, what have you picked up about the investigation so far?
We could find here at USA Today about him using our various sources. There's a lot of people in the immigrant communities who don't really leave much of a trace. So I think what we're going to know more in the next few hours is a little bit more about where he came from, who he associated with, and what may have inspired him. As the mayor mentioned in that clip, there's so many things on the internet that people can use to gather inspiration to commit terror, as well as instructions on how to put together a bomb. So there's still a lot to learn.
William, what more do we know about this suspect? Some reports say that he is a 27-year-old ISIS-inspired man who was acting alone.
Yeah, very little information coming through as of yet. Of course, the media very much pressed officials at their press conference, but law enforcement at this stage very much staying tight-lipped. Of course, this investigation still very much in its early stages. They're, of course, looking at the incident and looking at surveillance footage from the Port Authority, but also conducting and extending that operation to look at this suspect's home. And now, of course, the question turns to whether there are accomplices, whether this is part of any kind of a bigger plot. These are all very much questions that law enforcement will be asking and will be looking into in the minutes and hours ahead.
Meeting of the foreign ministers of India, China and Russia took a joint stand. These three foreign ministers took a joint stand against terror without naming Pakistan, interestingly. The three countries said that every state should take adequate measures to prevent terror activities from their soil. The three countries said preventing terror and countering extremism is the primary responsibility of states. India, Russia and China have decided to step up cooperation to prevent counter-terrorism and radicalization and combat the spread of terrorist ideology.
कि आतंकवादी संगठनों जैसे दाइश, जिसे ISIS भी कहते हैं, अल-कायदा, लश्कर-ए-तैयबा आदि के आतंकी कारनामों में बढ़ोतरी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय शांति और सुरक्षा के प्रयासों को प्रभावित कर रही है और वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था को मजबूत करने और टिकाऊ विकास को सुनिश्चित करने की हमारी कोशिशों को धक्का पहुंचा रही है। भारत वैश्विक आतंकवाद से निपटने के लिए एक व्यापक नीति बनाने की पुरजोर सिफारिश करता है। इस नीति से चरमपंथ से निपटना, धार्मिक कट्टरता का मुकाबला करना, आतंकियों की भर्ती पर रोक लगाना, आतंकवादियों के आवागमन को प्रभावित करना और आतंकवाद के वित्त पोषण के सभी स्रोतों पर रोक लगाना, फॉरेन टेररिस्ट फाइटर्स के बुनियादी ढांचे को ध्वस्त करना और इंटरनेट के माध्यम से आतंकवाद के दुष्प्रचार का मुकाबला करने के प्रयासों को शामिल करना चाहिए, पर यहीं तक सीमित नहीं रहना चाहिए, इससे भी और आगे बढ़ना चाहिए।
India, Russia and China have also advocated a quote-unquote comprehensive reform of the United Nations, including its Security Council, and reiterated support for India's aspiration to play a greater role in the United Nations. The joint statement noted that India must have a greater role in international affairs and the United Nations.
We support the UN in playing an important role in international affairs, and we uphold the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, abide by the basic norms governing international relations, and respect the right of various countries in independently choose their development paths and social systems.
Now, the other big developing story, U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel has led to outrage globally. Muslim groups around the world are treating Trump's decision beyond a regional issue. They're rallying support behind the Palestinians.
Trump's Jerusalem decision has sparked a fresh wave of tensions on the ground. Over the weekend, a Palestinian man stabbed an Israeli security guard in Jerusalem. After Trump's announcement, the dispute is no longer limited to a region. The decision has sparked protests from Muslim communities around the world. In Indonesia, which has the largest Muslim population in the world, thousands of protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta to protest.
This shows Muslims around the world are united. The statement by the United States President has destroyed peace and has pushed the region into chaos again. Although the United States is a powerful nation, we would like to urge them to be careful of what they say, because Palestine is an independent, sovereign state.
Similar protests were also in Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka. About 2,000 protesters from a local group tried to pull down barriers and march to the U.S. Embassy in the city.
It is in the land of Muslims. It is the land of Palestinians. Jerusalem can never be the capital of Israel. We don't want to see the Jews in Jerusalem.
Amid the global condemnation, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to garner support for his country in Brussels.
Jerusalem is Israel's capital. No one can deny it. It doesn't obviate peace. It makes peace possible, because recognizing reality is the substance of peace. It's the foundation of peace.
But there is no change in European Union's stance. They continue to stand against Donald Trump's decision.
You know where the European Union stands. We believe that the only realistic solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine is based on two states, with Jerusalem as the capital of both the State of Israel and the State of Palestine along the 67 line.
Trump's Jerusalem decision has alienated both the U.S. and Israel, at least publicly, while Trump administration insists it is trying a fresh approach to solve the dispute. Bureau Report, WION.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin is touring Turkey and the Middle East today after dropping in on President Erdogan. The Russian head of state held talks with his ally, President Bashar al-Assad, in Syria. With Russian and Iranian assistance, the Syrian war against the Islamic State is over as it is in Iraq. So what is the Russian president doing in the region now? Senior foreign editor Padma Rao takes a look at the shifting sands of big power politics across the Middle East on the heels of US President Trump's official recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
The announcement was as predictable as the spate of reactions it unleashed around the world. Almost as if on cue, tens of thousands of Muslims and left-wingers took to the streets in protest, while heads of state cleared their throats on national broadcasts to announce their statutory reaction to what United States President Donald Trump had just announced: that Washington recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and that its embassy in Tel Aviv will move to the Holy City, where Israel maintains its own seat of government. The degree of outrage varied, but the condemnation was unanimous. Let's take a look at who said what on Jerusalem. President Vladimir Putin: Trump's declaration on Jerusalem defies common sense. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt: do not complicate the situation in the region. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey: we will not abandon Jerusalem to child murderer occupier Israel. And President Bashar al-Assad of Syria said the future of Jerusalem not determined by a president but by its history.
Yes, geopolitics is complicated. Let's try to break it down for you. We have a good panel. Stephen Lendman, former U.S. military officer and writer, joining us from Chicago. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Keder from Tel Aviv, and Bianca Zanini, international affairs correspondent at I-24 News, with us from Jaffa in Israel. Good evening to all of you. Bianca, you're on the ground, you're looking at the developments. Take us through what Monday was like in Israel.
Right. Look, I think the big question here, or the big point to make here, is that U.S. President Donald Trump really decided to defy the warnings from the Arab world when he decided to go through with his decision on Jerusalem. Excuse me, I have to take this out because I can hear myself. Israel has been bracing for uprising. Israel has been bracing for clashes, for protests. We've heard Hamas calling for a third intifada, calling for people to go on the ground, but that so far has not really been consistent with what we've seen on the streets. Today we've had minor injuries, few injuries in Gaza, in Jerusalem. Been just one of the areas that we've seen a lot of protests and clashes, but it hasn't been as widespread. It hasn't been to the magnitude that some people have feared. In the city itself, it's been pretty localized. The biggest protests we saw were Friday and Saturday, mostly around Damascus Gate, also, of course, in Ramallah, in Nablus, in Hebron, and in Gaza. So this is something that we're seeing sporadically. Okay, pockets of protests. We have seen injuries. We've seen some sort of an escalation yesterday, in the sense that there was this attack that your report mentioned on an Israeli security guard, a terrorist attack that was in direct response to Trump's decision. But so far, it hasn't been to the scale that many have worried.
And I'm quoting, Trump just followed Putin. That's a lot to say. Stephen Lendman, what is Vladimir Putin doing in the region then?
You could say he's taking a victory lap because Russian forces, together with Syrian forces and Hezbollah forces and Iranian help, smashed ISIS, defeated ISIS. And I must emphasize, U.S. supported ISIS. Documented evidence shows it overwhelmingly, along with other terrorist groups. So that's what he's doing there. He's working to solidify peace in the country, which is the toughest battle to wage. It won't be achieved easily because of the threat posed by America's presence by still remaining terrorists, some in Syria, certainly in the region. So the conflict continues, but the war has been mainly won in Syria. Russia will bring home, Putin ordered most of Russian forces home from Syria, making a comment that if terrorists raise their ugly head again, they will be smashed harder and more ferociously than anything they've seen from Russia so far. That's what he's doing. He's a little more optimistic than I am. I think winning the battle in Syria, in Iraq, elsewhere in the region has a long way to go for one simple reason. America, Israel, and their partners don't want peace. They want war. That's their agenda. That's their imperial agenda. What they want is to impose dominance over the region, eliminating all sovereign independent countries, Syria, we've seen it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Iran is on the list, maybe Russia and China are on the list, most likely.
Sure. Bianca, very quickly before I wrap this, I want to ask you, how does Israel see Vladimir Putin's visit and his role in this conflict?
Well, I just actually want to pull this back 1 second and ask the bigger question here, which I think for the people on the ground and for a lot of Israelis, the big question is, will this decision from Donald Trump, whether or not it is simply repeating a reality, will this bring us any closer to peace, or will it bring us further away? And right now what we've heard from the Palestinians is that the U.S. has lost its ability to be a mediator. It can no longer be in that role. And the big question is then, who will take over? Could Putin be interested in this? Is this something that we could see? I mean, we do know that Putin wants to expand his influence in the Middle East, let's put it like this. So this is an opportunity for him. Another thing is, though, that although right now we are seeing clashes, this is a big thing, a lot of analysts are saying this is mostly a symbolic move and that things will calm down in a few months from now, and then once the cooler heads prevail, we'll be able to talk about what's actually going to happen next.
Interesting times in the region. Thanks very much, Bianca, Stephen and Dr. Kheder, for joining us this evening on Gravitas. Let's turn to developments closer home. Nepal's left alliance, comprising the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist or CPN-UML, and the CPN Maoist Centre, has a 2/3 majority in the elections that just concluded. They have won 110 of the 165 seats in parliament. Its ally, the Rashtra Jan Morcha, has won 1 seat, taking their total tally to 111. Under a complicated electoral system, 110 seats are also allocated on a proportional basis. And here too, the Left Alliance is in the lead. The Nepali Congress of Sher Bahadur Deuba, the current Prime Minister, the largest party in the last elections, is a poor third. The ethnic Madheshi parties had won 19 seats when last reports came in. The result suggests a stable government after a decade of political instability in the country. The man expected to lead the new alliance and be sworn in as Prime Minister is KP Oli of the CPN-UML. He has been Prime Minister before, but Prachand of the Maoist Centre has also been elected and could be a contender for the same job. The China leanings of the ruling Left Alliance may be more visible in the days ahead. China's reported support of the Left Alliance could see their influence rise in Nepal. Indian diplomats expect ruling party politicians to leverage China against India. That's a game that Nepal has been playing for a while now. The Left Alliance may try to undermine the Nepal army's strong ties with the Indian army. We'll see how that goes. But the question then is India isolated in South Asia? Nepal may have a pro-China government before long. The Maldives has moved closer to Beijing. Sri Lanka is heavily in debt to China. India's challenges in the region are growing for sure.
Winds of change in South Asia, not entirely to India's liking. The first and most recent is Nepal's election result, where an alliance of left parties has emerged with the largest number of seats in parliament. Apart from the Left Alliance's suspected proximity to China, the man who could take over as Prime Minister is KP Sharma Oli, who has proved a difficult customer for India to deal with. Last week, Maldivian President Abdullah Yameen snubbed India by signing on to China's Belt and Road Initiative and a free trade agreement. It has added to speculation that China's military-naval relationship with the Maldives is going to receive a major boost. And over the weekend, Sri Lanka handed over the Hambantota port to China on a 99-year lease. The port sits on the Indian Ocean sea lanes, and Indian naval assessment is that there could be more Chinese submarines and naval vessels docking there. So why has this happened? The reasons for India's isolation could be as follows. Nepal's left turn may have less to do with India and probably have more to do with the incompetence of successive governments. There have been 11 governments in 10 years in Nepal, but Nepali politicians find India a convenient whipping boy for their failures. In the Maldives, President Yamin may be consolidating his power ahead of elections next year. Sri Lanka cannot pay its $8 billion debt to China and so is handing over land. China has taken advantage of the prevailing situation and leveraged its diplomatic and financial muscle to its advantage. But international politics is always dynamic, constantly evolving as national interests transform and realign. There is also the fact that India is culturally aligned to these countries, unlike China, and there could be rebalancing before long. Bureau Report, WION.